from across the north of England and the Midlands on how people have coped with the June floods, an unprecedented midsummer disaster. With me now is someone who knows all about the record-breaking rain that's fallen this week, the BBC weather forecaster Phil Avery. Phil, have you ever seen anything like this before?
Well, Natasha, I've been doing weather for about 20 years or so, but the statistics that a local colleague of mine, Paul Hudson, supplied really made me sit up and take notice of the scale of this whole situation. Here we have the example. Sheffield, normal month of June, 67 millimetres of rain. So far this month, to 9 o'clock this morning, 277 millimetres of rain. Over 200 millimetres, over 8 inches of rain, more than they would normally expect. The records in the area go back to 1882. The previous record was set back in the early 1980s, and we have beaten that record already this month by some 40 millimetres, and there's more rain to come.
We're going to be hearing from you later on, as you said, a full weather forecast coming up later from Phil. Well, nowhere was worse affected than Yorkshire, where rainfall broke all records, the trigger for a set of disasters. Well, here's Mark Simpson now. On the week, the floods came to the White Rose County.
A lift home from work in Sheffield city centre on a summer's evening. It seemed bizarre. It felt unreal. People kept saying the water can't get any higher, but sadly it did. 14-year-old Ryan Parry was walking home from school when he was swept away by a swollen river in Sheffield. Hundreds of people were forced to abandon their cars, including 68-year-old Peter Harding, who drowned in the floodwater while frantically trying to seek safety. "70 miles away in Hull, Michael Barnett got trapped in a drain while trying to clear water from his grandfather's home. Police divers were called in to try to free him, but the water level kept rising and the 28-year-old man died on the street. This isn't a North Sea oil rig. This is the centre of a modern English city. It's been the largest rescue effort in peacetime Britain. There were 600 calls for help in and around Sheffield and South Yorkshire. Cold but relieved, the survivors gathered in temporary shelters.
The run I've just done, it's quite a touching one for myself. I've just actually brought my own grandson out of there. He's only 5 months old. So I'm relieved to see him safe and sound in there.
Tracy and Gary Birch were among 300 people evacuated from the village of Catcliffe. They grabbed what they could, then left.
It's a very, very sickly feeling.
You feel a bit shaky, don't you?
Yeah, you do. It's very hard to explain.
It's like a roller coaster, isn't it, really?
I'm on my tiptoes at this.
The next day, Gary went back to see what was left.
It's just everything's gone. Everything you worked for, it's gone. 7 grand's worth of kitchen just cleared in 2 days.
He didn't stay long. He went back to tell his wife the bad news. It was a similar story on street after street, in home after home.
I actually do feel sick. I'm just gutted.
It's just a case of waiting until it goes down and then having to clean up and deal with it. And it's not just me, it's the whole village.
Burst banks meant huge danger and residents running for cover to school halls and sports centres.
We've come here because basically our house is 6 foot underwater. We've got nowhere else to go, just here. There's me, my 4 kids, my husband and my 2 grandkids.
My world's gone, everything, I've lost everything. I lost my daughter's first photograph. It's downstairs and I know it's gone. So everything's gone.
The M1 in South Yorkshire at rush hour. Meadow Hall, normally one of the busiest shopping centres in Britain. They used to play football here. This used to supply electricity. At Ully Reservoir, the problem isn't usually flooding, but drought. Up close, this may look like a scene from a picture postcard, but this reservoir is bursting. That's the problem. Over there is the solution. Firefighters arrived from as far away as Merseyside and Cumbria to try to stop the dam from breaking and to try to avoid more homes and businesses turning into scenes like this.
We have freezers, fridge freezers, cookers, dryers, plasma televisions, liquid crystal televisions, all the lot. Everything's ruined.
I can't understand why we weren't warned, really. I really can't, because nobody alerted us at all.
Overall, the problem in Yorkshire wasn't just the amount of water, but its ferocity. It was unclean, unexpected, and worst of all, unstoppable.
Well, hundreds of people have been flooded out of their homes. Many have now gone back, but some haven't been able to return. Now, they've spent all week bedded down in emergency centres. Well, this morning, I went along to one at Ridgewood School in nearby Scoresby. It has been another long night for people waking up here to the news that they'll probably have to stay here for several more weeks. For now, home is this sports hall with just the few belongings they were able to bring with them. Debbie, you are here with your 8 children and your dog. Tell us how it's been.
Well, we left the house at Tuesday night at 7 o'clock and we come out with no clothes. But these shelters have been providing clothing for your children if you need it. You're well looked after. The food is lovely, cups of tea, towels for showers. The children aren't so bad being here now.
You've been told that you might have to stay here for 3 or 4 weeks. How does that make you feel?
It's terrible, it's devastating. My children want to be home, we want to go back to school, go back to normality. That's all we want. We've got friends and family where we live. And it's devastating. I just feel like bursting into tears before to being here for another 3 to 4 weeks or more.
Now, you, Will, have only been here, and Aaron, your son, been here for a night, and you're very worried about your house. What's happened to you?
Well, my house has got at least 2 foot of water inside it. No electric.
And what have you left behind? What's happened to your house?
I've left my dog, all my belongings. I've left all my furniture. I've left all my clothes. I got a few out for Aaron and his mum. His mum got rushed to hospital before I got here.
So it's really tough for you, and you've left your dog at home, haven't you? You're very worried about the dog, but you're going to be able to go back and get it today.
Even if I've got to swim for him, I'll go and get it.
Despite the difficulties, people here are remarkably positive and grateful for the help that they've received. But all of them are desperate for the floodwaters to subside and to be able to return home. So that's how some of the worst affected people are coping. But it all began with warnings from weather forecasters tracking satellite images of torrential rain heading for the Midlands and Yorkshire. The BBC's Phil Avery was one of those keeping watch.
I'm here at the BBC Weather Centre, which is where we got the first signs that something was going to go horribly wrong with the weather as early as the tail end of last week, when the Met Office down in Exeter actually issued their first warning of a significant weather event. And this is how the chart looked for that particular day. This area of low pressure sat right over the top of the British Isles is very unusual for this time of year. This whole feature should in fact be a lot closer to Iceland at this time of year. The steering mechanism is a core of very strong winds that normally takes these features all the way across the Atlantic, but on a much more northerly track for this particular time of year. But that whole feature is a good deal further south, and we happen to be here in the British Isles right in the firing line. Cold Arctic air streaming down along the lines here of the isobars, mixing with warm, moist air coming up from the Atlantic. Where those two meet is where we ended up with this very persistent and very strong downpour of rain across the British Isles. You'll see that along the line of those two differing air masses, that's exactly where we've got the torrential downpours. We forecast around about 4 inches of rain, and on the Monday, Fylingdales on the North York Moors actually recorded 103 millimetres of rain. That's just over 4 inches.
Well, the man who knows what's what, Phil Avery, still with me now. Phil, can you believe this is midsummer?
Well, there's showers in the air again here today. As you will see a little bit later in the programme, we've got more warnings for heavy rain across many parts of England and Wales. The statistics are really quite incredible. As I finished off that particular piece, 103 millimetres fell on Monday just up in Fylingdales in the North York Moors, and you see the consequences of it.
Phil, I mean, whenever we have unusual weather like this, people always say this is part of climate change. Is it?
Well, there's definitely a pattern. You know, I've got an absolute litany of stats. If we had longer, I could tell you about the flooding that was just in North Yorkshire here in 2005. We go back to Linton and Lynmouth in 1950s. Nobody mentioned global warming there. But we do have a greater frequency of these sort of events building up. And there is definitely a definite change in the pattern of our weather across here in the British Isles.
As I said, you're back later on with a full weather forecast, Phil, aren't you? But all week you've been sending us your pictures and videos to the BBC, telling us your stories of the floods. 15-year-old Annie Thompson sent in some of the most dramatic pictures all week. Now, she was on a school bus when it was caught by the waters in Wetherby, and this is her story.
We got on the bus and it had been raining all day, but it wasn't raining as much at that time. We could see through the trees. All the river had rose a lot more than it was, and it had overflowed onto the road, and in the gutter was full of water. And then we stopped because it had been cordoned off by the police. Then the police spoke to the driver and said we could go through. As we got down the road, I got my phone out because I noticed it was getting really wet and it was splashing all over the bus windows. I started filming the side of the road, all the water that was splashing against the side of the bus. And then everyone started screaming really loud because the water had, shot through the front of the bus. At first we thought it was funny, but it was quite scary afterwards because we thought it was going to continue getting higher and higher. And it was, as high as the seats on the bus. And there were bags floating in it, and everyone was screaming and shouting because everyone thought they were going to drown, and they were all really scared. I got home and told my mum all about what had happened on the bus, and at first she just thought I was making a big deal out of things and it was just a bit of water. And then when I showed her the video, she couldn't believe it, that had actually happened on the bus.
Frightening stuff there. 15-year-old Annie Thompson with her story. Well, locals like Annie are still recovering from the horror of this week's events, and as they try to get their lives back together, local scientists are piecing together why the rivers here are bursting their banks. Now, they say big changes in how the land is used could be behind all of this. So our correspondent Robert Hall took to the skies to look for evidence.
It was a complicated flight plan, a 100-mile course that would require keen eyes and a degree of detective work. A flight plan that began over the flooded farms and villages that are still assessing the impact of the deluge 5 days on.
The landscape below us contains ample evidence of man fighting to keep the water back and fighting to protect what he's built here. Once upon a time, this part of North Nottinghamshire would have been a huge area of fenland, a natural floodplain. But over the centuries, it and the whole region have seen dramatic changes.
Perhaps the next few hours would help explain why the rivers are behaving as they are. At Sheffield Airport, I met an academic whose research pinpoints man's impact on Yorkshire's rivers.
You can see here to the west all the channels emanating along the edge of the Pennines, and this lower area, the boundary there is an artificial boundary of the mapping, but this huge wetland, and that's before, that's after. The channels are simplified, often straightened, often modified, and the great wetland to the east has gone.
But what of the source of so much destruction? We flew north to trace the birthplace of the River Don. High in the Pennines, shining pools of rainwater betray that source, feeding a stream that rises in the peat beds.
And this is really where nature and man begin to conflict. The peat here should act as a natural sponge, but over centuries it's been cut for fuel, and that sponge is no longer as effective.
So a greater volume of water is released to tumble down the hillsides towards Sheffield. Below us, the towns and villages that are the first to witness the consequences. They too bear scars from the storm. By the time the Don reaches the heart of an industrialised city, it's been forced into stone culverts and under bridges that this week simply couldn't cope.
And this is where that conflict is probably at its greatest. Centuries of building and industry, continuing development, forcing the river into an ever-narrowing channel.
At Conisborough, the Don, reinforced by its sister the Rother, squeezes through a natural gorge to its old floodplain beyond.
And so we're back to where our journey began, a journey which has shown us the impact that man has had on this environment and the way in which the region's rivers are still adapting to his presence.
Well, it's not just Yorkshire that has suffered in the floods. Across the Midlands, waters have also deluged homes, shops and washed away bridges and also ruined crops. Our correspondent Rajesh Merchandani has spent the week there.
3 weeks now in the Midlands there have been floods. They've hit farms, villages like here near Sutton Coldfield.
We've never had a flooding before in 20 years.
And cities like Birmingham, where the floodwaters were polluted. Are you worried about the water being dirty?
No, I'm not. I'm more worried about where I'm going to sleep tonight.
Then week 2, and heavy rainfall knocks out the Severn Valley Steam Railway. Parts of it won't run till the autumn. The tourist industry is suffering.
We have school parties, school trips, so I've had to cancel all those. I haven't worked for a couple of weeks.
Raging storms ripped through people's homes as the weather got wilder.
This shed was 100 feet in that direction. It got swept and dumped here by the water.
And then just as you thought it couldn't get any worse, this week it did.
Basically, we got the kids, threw some clothes on and we ran for our lives.
Before I could do anything, he'd come to the second step of my front door down there, and it was in, and there was nothing I could do.
Perhaps the luckiest escape was here in Ludlow in Shropshire. When this bridge collapsed, it broke a gas main, causing explosions and leaving locals shocked.
Well, all the houses were blown up, weren't they? People could have been killed, couldn't they? Quite easily, you know.
20 homes were evacuated, but watch the house on the right. A few hours later, caught on mobile phone, it gave way. A life laid bare, torn apart. Gordon and Doreen Pierce's home of 40 years.
Your wardrobe's still there, the chair's still there.
Yeah.
Look at it. I just can't believe that.
No,
you can't. Can even see my dressing gown hung on the back of the bedroom door.
How are you feeling?
No,
Not brilliant.
No.
Not brilliant at all.
But for some, it was worse. A 68-year-old man died when his car plunged into a swollen ford near Pershaw. Eric Dickinson had phoned his wife as he was swept downstream. Tenbury Wells in Worcestershire, where I spent 24 hours watching the River Team rise and rise and rise. And by morning, much of the town was submerged, precious little spared, and business people fearing the worst.
The wine bar, we're just watching the water come in at the moment.
But just look at it now, no water and new friends.
Amazing community spirit. Never known so many people who we don't know come and help.
And with the same grit, Upton-upon-Severn awaited its fate, its flood defences doing their job. Throughout the Midlands, thousands are bracing for more. While some, well, they're just living for the moment.
Well, there can't be many things worse than having your home or indeed your business ruined. It's only then, I suppose, that you start to think about where you put those home insurance details or indeed whether or not you have them at all. So what should you do? Well, let's speak now to Tony Beckwith. He's the Chief Operating Officer for insurers Abbey. Some of the people I spoke to this morning, Tony, don't have insurance at all. But if you do, are floods covered?
Thankfully, for most people, yes, they are. It does depend on the type of policy that the people have taken out. If they've taken out an unlimited sum insured policy, that gives them total peace of mind. Everything is replaced on a new for old basis. Their accommodation costs are covered, etc. A lot of people will take policies out which are called specified insured. Now, the amount of cover they have depends on how much insurance they've specified and how much they've paid for. But for most people, thankfully, yes.
There's probably a lot of small print, isn't there, Tony?
There's always a lot of small print.
There's always small print, isn't it?
Yeah.
But if you do have insurance, what are the practical steps you need to take?
When you get back into your house, preferably before you get back into your house, contact your insurer. We have loss adjusters on site in Bentley here today, working with customers, advising them what steps to take, how to protect themselves and their belongings. On a practical basis, keep all receipts. If you have to replace things, you'll need to evidence to the insurance company how much it's cost. Equally, on a practical basis, if you have to lift the carpets, for example, to get the floorboards dried off, don't throw anything away. Keep it, you've got to evidence.
I mean, that's the difficult thing, isn't it? I mean, you mentioned the receipts there. Do you actually always need receipts, or can you ever get around that?
No, that's why I say keep the belongings that you have. The loss adjusters will take a view as to what quality they were and make sure they're replaced. But if you're buying new things to replace emergency replacement items, keep those receipts because they all count towards your insurance claim.
Tony Beckwith, thank you very much indeed. And I'm sure you're very busy at the moment, so we're grateful for your time today. Thank you. Well, as you might expect, the government has come in for a great deal of criticism this week about what's happened. Plenty of people saying that they're not doing enough on flood defences. So can Britain's towns and cities actually cope with the torrential rain that we've seen? And is it safe to build houses in places prone to flooding just like this? Well, we sent our environment correspondent David Shookman to the other end of the country, to Brighton, to find out.
Stormy weather on the south coast, heavy rain forecast, and after this terrible week, many are asking, how is the country meant to cope if all this gets worse with climate change? Well, here in Brighton, they believe they've got the answer, underground, beneath their pier. It's not the most glamorous of assignments, but I'm on my way to see the sewage system. So where does this passage lead to then? It's down here in these tunnels that the rainwater ends up. The question now, whether the system is up to the task. To visit this system, you have to wear a hard hat because the ceilings are so low, and gloves, well, for obvious reasons, because just here, there's an open sewer. It does smell, it's pretty unpleasant, but it's very important because when there's a rainstorm, the rainwater ends up in here. And if it's a really intense storm like we've just had earlier this week, well, they've got a plan for coping with that. If there is too much rain, the whole lot is allowed to overflow, pour down here. Horrible thought, but it is a safety valve that keeps the city safe because it's all channeled into this huge tunnel and then sent deeper underground to a huge cavern where it's stored and dealt with later.
These old Victorian sewers are made of brick, as you can see, and they do stand the test of time.
All this was built for a very different age. Up and down the country, the cities have grown dramatically. And climate scientists are warning that rainstorms will become more intense. So it seems another wave of investment is needed.
There's more work to do, but I think because the Victorians put in such a good solid base for us, we're already have got a head start on that situation. So it's about adding to those sewers, as we've done here with this new tunnel we have here.
And what about another option? Tackling the water above ground. This innocent-looking stream in South London turns into a torrent when there's rain. These houses used to get flooded every few years, so what they've done here is clear away this bank to deliberately allow the river a chance to flood into this park. But of course, the really big question is it wise to allow any kind of building in an area at risk of flooding in the first place? Most controversial, the plans for thousands of new homes along the Thames estuary.
Already across the country, 600,000 people are at severe risk of flooding.
Well, if we were going from a blank sheet, floodplains are what it says on the tin. They fill up when it floods. And putting properties into the floodplain should not be the way forward for the future.
In the meantime, in many parts of the country, we're relying on an old labyrinth of drains. But if the climate forecasts are right and we get more storms like this week, we may need to think again, as boldly as the Victorians once did.
Well, of course, what everybody here certainly wants to know are these floods going to go away? Well, Phil, as you can see, is still with me. Lots of people, their lives so disrupted. Phil, have we seen anything like this here before?
Well, I was talking to the insurance guy earlier on. He didn't try and sell me anything, I have to say. The Environment Agency, my colleagues there, have this down as a 1 in 150-year occurrence for somewhere just like Bentley. And here we see it now. I have to tell you that there was flooding in Yorkshire back in 2005. And as I was saying earlier on, there's a whole litany of places across the country for different causes, it has to be said. Boscastle was a completely different setup to this, but there was flooding across the Midlands back in the early 2000s, which was a very similar setup to this, at the confluence of two different air masses, and we are going to see more events like this in the coming years. I'm absolutely sure about it.
Spits and spots in the air right now. Tell us what's happening in the next few days, Phil.
Absolutely, yes. But I'm not going to concentrate too much on what is going to go on in the next 24 hours. For that, check out my colleagues on News 24, on BBC One and the 1 o'clock news. But the Met Office have got an early warning out about more severe weather that is potentially coming our way through the course of this weekend. And the bulk of it seems to be heading yet again just where we didn't need it, for parts of England and Wales. Now, where's it all coming from? Well, the Atlantic satellite picture shows the low pressure which has dominated our weather so far this week, gradually moving off towards the continent. Following on behind, coming in from the west, we've got a new area of low pressure. Now, as that works its way in through Saturday, it'll spread rain initially into the western parts of the British Isles, gradually driving its way a little bit further to the north, bringing yet more rain in through the Midlands and into the north of England as well. Very few areas will escape it. Temperatures really quite immaterial, still hovering below the seasonal average. We're on the cool side. And then on Sunday, just when you thought you were out of the woods, the heavy rain will gradually pull its way out into the continent, but following on behind, just when the sun starts coming out and you think the worst is past, we may kick off some really heavy showers. And it may well be that we could see any amount of rain between about 20 millimetres at its lightest up to around about 40 millimetres of rain. Not quite as heavy as we've had it through Monday, but rain nonetheless just where we didn't really want it. Natasha.
Phil, thank you very much. Well, it's supposed to be midsummer, but you certainly wouldn't know it. It's been a terrible week for people here and many thousands of others in the week of the June floods. As you know, it's a very busy day of news, so straight after this programme, we're going to be joining Matthew Amraliwala and Carrie Gracie on News 24 for the very latest on today's bomb threat to London. But for now, we thought we'd leave you with more of your images, some of the thousands you've sent in to us, with the music of Sheffield-born Jarvis Cocker. So from Bentley in South Yorkshire, goodbye.
Now everybody knows stormy weather always makes me think of you.
Floods, that's where tram is.
I am now filming.
Death and destruction coming through. Oh, look out, there she blows. Now everybody knows stormy weather always makes me think of you.
Look, the rest of you are doing life jacket things.
'Cause the storm is coming through. Yeah, watch out, 'cause the storm is coming through.
Well, a very good morning. This is a BBC News special from BBC News 24. Police in London say they've defused a suspected bomb in the centre of the capital.
The device was found when explosives officers were called to examine a car parked in the Haymarket, a street near Piccadilly Circus, in the early hours of the morning. The device was made safe by a controlled explosion.
Well, in just a moment or two, we're live at Scotland Yard for a news conference. But first, here's what we know so far, because an investigation has been launched by the Metropolitan Police's Counter-Terrorism Command. Officers have described the device as being, quote, potentially viable.
They confirmed that gas cylinders were found in the vehicle. The Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, called on the country to be vigilant, adding that it's facing a continuing security threat.
The new Home Secretary, Jackie Smith, has chaired a meeting of the government's emergency COBRA meeting this morning.